Last week, in the life and crimes of Rosa Parks, we discussed Rosa's upbringing in Pine Level, Alabama, and the life experiences which shaped her into the woman who would become an American icon. Now, on with our story. Welcome to The Secret Sits. I'm your host, John Dodson. Join us every Thursday as we uncover the secrets behind the world's most fascinating true crime cases. You can find all episodes of The Secret Sits for free on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you are hearing, reach out to us on Instagram and Facebook at TheSecretSitsPodcast or on Twitter at TheSecretSitsPod. Now, on with our story. This is episode 2 of the life and crimes of Rosa Parks. Today, I'm going to continue telling you the story of an American icon, and I am doing so as much as I can by telling her story from her perspective. Because of this, I will be using the exact verbiage Rosa Parks used, referring to African Americans as Black people and occasionally using the word Negro. Nothing in this story is intended to be offensive to our listeners, and we have been as sensitive with this content as we could possibly be. We hope you enjoy. Rosa Parks has said that she believed no segregation law angered Black people in Montgomery more than the laws about segregation on public transportation. The original laws were passed way back in 1900, and they had been suffering under these laws for over half a century. There was now a population of 50,000 Black residents in Montgomery, Alabama, and Black people used the buses a majority of the time. Rosa rode a segregated bus twice a day, 5 days a week. Most white people could afford cars, and they hardly used the buses anymore anyway. Some local white lawyers who worked with the Black community tried to make even minor changes to the laws and policies. For instance, just the fact that people had to pay in the front and walk all the way around to the back to get on the bus. Why was that still a thing? But the bus company replied, "Your folks started it. They do it because they want to." Then they tried to get the bus route to Day Street extended. The bus stopped just before the Day Street Bridge. What was on the other side of the bridge? A small Black community, and everyone from this area had to walk a half a mile over the bridge to get to the bus stop. The bus company simply responded, as long as they were willing to walk the half a mile and still pay to ride the rest of the way, they would not change anything. One caveat that was granted to the Black bus patrons was that the buses would stop at the end of each block in Black neighborhoods, just like they already did in white areas. Rosa brought up the idea of a bus boycott, but too many members of the community said that they had too far to travel for work and errands to not be able to utilize the bus system. The Montgomery NAACP was playing with the idea of filing a lawsuit against the city over the bus discrimination, but they needed to find the exact right plaintiff and a strong case behind that person. They considered a woman to be the best plaintiff, if for nothing more than sympathy, but she would have to be above reproach and have had done nothing wrong except refusing to give up her seat. The first case they looked at was for a young woman named Claudette Colvin. She refused to give up her seat. She had paid her dime to ride, and she did not feel the need to move just so a white person could take her seat. Claudette was removed from the bus by police and arrested. After looking more into the case, it was discovered that Claudette was pregnant and unmarried. That was the end of her case being used. The group had no luck finding a perfect victim to be presented to the court, and Rosa had no intentions of being that perfect defendant. But then came December 1st, 1955. If Rosa had been paying even the slightest bit of attention, she would have never been arrested. But alas, sometimes things happen for a reason. It was a very busy time for Rosa. She was organizing an NAACP workshop, gaining access to buildings for meetings, and working on upcoming elections for the NAACP. Rosa finished her work for the day a bit later into the evening, and she walked down to the court square and caught the Cleveland Avenue bus home as usual. But Rosa did not look to see who was driving the bus before she boarded. She paid her fare, and then she looked at the face of the man who had kicked her off the bus years earlier. He still looked as mean as ever to Rosa, but she had already paid her fare. She looked and saw an empty seat in the middle section of the bus, and she sat down. The bus moved along to the next stop, Empire Theater. Here, some more white people boarded the bus. All of the whites' only seats were now taken, and the one white man had no seat and remained standing. The burly bus driver looked back and saw the white man standing, and he yelled, "Let me have those front seats." He was referring to the front seats of the black section. Nobody moved. "Y'all better make it light on yourselves and let me have those seats," the man barked. A black man sitting next to Rosa in the window seat stood and moved to stand in the back of the bus. Rosa looked at the seat across the aisle from her, and there sat two black girls. They also stood and moved further to the back of the bus, where they also remained standing. Rosa slid over in her seat, positioning herself in the window seat the man had just vacated. There were now 3 open seats for this one white man who was standing. Rosa thought to herself, the more we give in and comply, the worse they treat us. Rosa then thought back to her grandfather and how he slept with a shotgun next to his bed, or it took up residence next to the fireplace during the day. He always had a shotgun ready to go, because he knew how black people were treated, and he would not let anyone mess with his family. People have always said Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat because she was tired. But that is not true. In a sense, she was not tired physically, not any more than she was on any other day. Rosa was not old, even though that is how some picture her in this moment. No, Rosa was 42 years old, younger than I am now, and she was just tired of giving in. The driver saw Rosa still sitting in her seat, and he asked her if she was going to get up. She said no. The driver replied, "Well, I'm going to have you arrested." And Rosa replied, "You may do that." These were the only words spoken between the driver and Rosa Parks. Rosa, at the time, did not even know the driver's name. It was James Blake. She would later find this out in court. James Blake stepped off of the bus and waited on the police to arrive. Rosa sat in her seat and sat in her convictions. She tried hard not to think about the terrible things that could happen to her because of this situation. She could be manhandled or beaten. Certainly, she would be arrested. Even as she sat there thinking about the terrible things that could happen to her, she chose to remain. Some of the passengers began exiting the bus, looking for transfers to other buses. People had their lives to lead and they needed to get places. Rosa thought that was fine. The people who stayed were all quiet. If conversations were being had, they were in hushed voices. 2 policemen finally showed up at the bus, and they boarded the bus and asked Rosa Parks why she did not stand up. "Why do you all push us around?" Rosa asked the officer, and the officer replied, "I don't know, but the law is the law, and you're under arrest." One of the officers picked up Rosa's pocketbook, and the other picked up her shopping bags, and they escorted her to their patrol car. The officers were not forceful or mean. After escorting her to the car, they gave her back her personal belongings. The officers then went to speak to the bus driver. They asked the driver if he wanted to swear out a warrant. Today, we would just say, "Do you want to press charges?" The driver told the policeman that he would finish his route and then head to the jail to fill out the warrant. At this point, Rosa was simply in police custody, but she was not legally under arrest. As the officers drove Rosa to City Hall, one officer asked her again, "Why didn't you just stand up when the driver spoke to you?" Rosa did not answer, and she remained silent in the back of the car all the way to City Hall. When the trio arrived and walked into the building, Rosa asked one of the officers if she could possibly have some water from the fountain because she was parched. The officer told her that would be fine, but as she bent over to take a drink, the other officer said, "No, you can't drink no water. You have to wait until you get to jail." Rosa was denied a sip of water. They walked up to the desk in City Hall to fill out the intake forms, and Rosa had to give her name and address. Rosa asked if she could make a phone call. She was told no. The police officers finished filling out the paperwork, and the three headed back out to the squad car so Rosa could be transported to the North Ripley Street jail. Rosa was not scared to go to jail. She was ready to just accept whatever happened. When they arrived at the jail, Rosa once again asked for a phone call. She was once again told no. She was instructed to place her purse on the counter and to empty all of her pockets of personal belongings. Rosa was not searched nor handcuffed. Rosa then went through processing. Her fingerprints were taken, as was her mugshot. A white female officer came to take her to the cell, and Rosa asked her if she could make a phone call. "I will go find out," the woman replied to her. As they walked up the stairs to the cells on the second floor, Rosa noticed that all of the cells were made of metal mesh, and the corridor was very dimly lit. Rosa was placed into an empty cell, and the heavy iron door swung closed with a crash. The female guard began walking away, but then turned back and said to Rosa, "There are 2 girls around the other side, and if you want to go over there with them instead of being in a cell by yourself, I'll take you over there." Rosa replied that it did not matter. "Let's go around there, and then you won't be in a cell alone." Rosa took this as the woman trying to be nice, but it did not make her feel any better. As the 2 women walked to the other cell, Rosa once again asked to make a phone call, but received the same response from the woman. Inside of this cell were 2 black women. One asked what happened to her, and the other acted like Rosa was not even there. Rosa told the woman that she had been arrested on the bus. The 2 women had a conversation, and the woman who had already been in the cell asked if she could do anything for Rosa. Rosa simply asked for a cup so she could have a sip of water. The woman took down a dark metal mug, which was hanging above the toilet, and Rosa took a few sips of water from the tap. The 2 women continued talking, and the stranger began telling Rosa about her personal problems, and Rosa began contemplating how she could help this woman. The matron came back to the cell and told Rosa to go with her. She was finally allowed to make a phone call. The woman handed Rosa a card and told her to write down the telephone number and who she was calling. As the phone began to ring, the woman stood close enough to Rosa to overhear her entire conversation. Rosa's mother answered the phone. "I'm in jail. See if Parks will come down here and get me out." Leona asked, "Did they beat you?" Rosa said, "No, I wasn't beaten, but I am in jail." Leona handed Parks the phone. Rosa again said, "Parks, will you come get me out of jail?" And he told her to hold on. He would be there in just a few minutes. Parks did not have a car, but serendipitously, a friend of Parks had heard about Rosa getting arrested, and he had just arrived at their house, so he drove Parks down to the jail. A white lawyer had to be contacted to call the jail and ask what the charges were. They would not tell the black lawyer who had called. He was told Rosa was arrested under the segregation laws. While this was happening, Parks called a white man he knew that could get bail money, and Parks' friend drove him there to pick up the money for the bail. As Rosa arrived back to her cell, following her phone call, the talkative woman had found a crumpled up piece of paper, and she had written down her two brothers' names and a phone number. She told Rosa to call them early in the morning as they left for work by 6 a.m. Just before the woman could hand Rosa the scrap of paper, the matron arrived again. She told Rosa that she was being released and began ushering her out of the cell. The woman did not get to hand the piece of paper to Rosa before the cell door was shut. So in vain, she crumpled up and tossed the paper over the top of the cell, and it fell down the stairwell, just at Rosa's feet. Rosa bent down and picked up the paper and stuck it into her pocket. As Rosa walked out of the cell block, there were a few people already waiting on her. She had a trial date set for December 5th, the following Monday. As she left the building, Rosa's emotions bubbled up. She had not realized how much being in jail had upset her until she was back outside. She arrived back home around 10 p.m. Mr. Nixon then asked Rosa if she would be willing to let her case be used as their test case. The subject was discussed and debated for a while, and Parks and Leona said they thought it was a good idea. Rosa agreed to be the plaintiff. Mr. Nixon was overjoyed that Rosa agreed to be the plaintiff. He stated, "Rosa Parks worked with me for 12 years prior to this. She was secretary for everything I had going on. The Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, the NAACP, the Alabama Voters League, all of those things. I knew she'd stand on her feet. She was honest, she was clean, she had integrity. The press couldn't go out and dig up something she did last year, or last month, or 5 years ago. They couldn't hang nothing like that on Rosa Parks." Rosa had no police record. She had worked and volunteered her entire life. She was not pregnant with a baby out of wedlock. The only thing Rosa had done to deserve this type of treatment was being born black. Fred Gray, one of the black attorneys in town, called Joanne Robinson and told her about the arrest. Joanne reached out to the other leaders on the Women's Political Council, and they planned a bus boycott starting on December 5th, the day of Rosa's trial. They put together a flyer and cut a stencil so that they could make 35,000 copies. The handbills were taken to the local black elementary and middle schools so that they could take the flyers home to their parents. The flyer read as follows: "This is for Monday, December 5th, 1955. Another Negro woman has been arrested and thrown into jail because she refused to get up out of her seat on the bus and give it to a white person. It is the second time since the Claudette Colvin case that a Negro woman has been arrested for the same thing. This has to be stopped. Negroes have rights too, for if Negroes did not ride the buses, they could not operate. 3/4 of the riders are Negroes, yet we are arrested or have to stand over empty seats. If we do not do something to stop these arrests, they will continue. The next time, it may be you, or your daughter, or mother. This woman's case will come up on Monday. We are, therefore, asking every Negro to stay off the buses Monday in protest of the arrest and trial. Don't ride the buses to work, to town, to school, or anywhere on Monday. You can afford to stay out of school for 1 day. If you work, take a cab or walk. But please, children and grown-ups don't ride the bus at all on Monday. Please stay off all buses Monday. The day after her arrest, Rosa woke up early and called the number the girl in jail had given to her. A man answered, and Rosa told him that his sister was in jail and asked her to reach out to him. The man simply said, "Okay," and that was that. A few days after this, a woman was walking down the sidewalk, passing by Rosa, and she stopped Rosa and said, "Hi, how are you?" The woman was dressed up and had her hair done really nice, but Rosa did not recognize this woman. The woman asked, "You don't know me?" To which Rosa said, "No." The woman chuckled a little and said, "I was the one who was in jail with you." Rosa told her that she was glad to see her out of jail, and Rosa hurried on, later realizing she'd not even gotten the woman's name, but she was happy the woman looked so good. Rosa attended a meeting with 18 local Black preachers. Some wanted to know what to do for the protest. Others debated whether they should have a protest at all, and some left the meeting before anything of significance was even discussed. The preachers who remained at the end of the meeting agreed to talk about the protest during their Sunday morning sermons. Joanne Robinson was able to get a modified version of the leaflet on the cover of the Sunday morning Montgomery Advisor. This helped get the word out to anyone with no children in school and those who did not attend church. There were 18 Black-owned cab companies in town, and they all agreed to make stops at all of the bus stops. They also agreed to only charge the same 10 cents a person that they would pay to ride on the bus. As Monday rolled around, everyone felt uneasy but ready. The sky was turning cloudy and dark. The fear of rain was palatable. That would be another kink in the protest if people were stuck out in the rain. It turned out that people had had enough of the segregationist laws, and the boycott went pretty well. Not all Black people avoided riding the bus. Some had not even heard of the protest. The city had 2 motorcycle police escorting every bus out of fear that the protest would cause a kerfuffle. But this caused even more Black people to stop riding the bus. Some did not understand what was going on, and they thought the cops were there to arrest them if they rode the bus. Some people could not be inconvenienced and rode the bus even though they did know about the protest. When the bus would pull up to the bus stops, these people would duck down so they could not be seen by the Black men and women waiting on taxi cabs. Rosa made her way down to the courthouse for her trial, Parks right beside her. Rosa was wearing a straight-cut, long-sleeved black dress with a white collar and cuffs. She donned a small black velvet hat with pearls across the top and a charcoal gray coat. She also had with her a black purse and white gloves. There were a lot of people at the courthouse, so many that not everyone could get inside. They did not initially allow Parks to enter the building, but after learning he was Rosa's husband, he was permitted to enter. There was one girl who stood out in the crowd to Rosa, Mary Frances. She had a particularly high-pitched voice that pierced through the cacophony of noise in the crowd. "Oh, she's so sweet. They mess with the wrong one now," Mary Frances said. The trial was not long. The bus driver was the prosecution's main witness. Another witness for the prosecution was a white woman who was on the bus. She testified that there had been an empty seat in the back, but Rosa refused to move to it. This was a lie. Rosa's attorney entered her plea of not guilty. Rosa did not take the stand. In fact, her attorney did not even attempt to defend Rosa against the charges. You see, she was the test case, the case to be used for real change, And to do that, this case had to make it to a higher court. They wanted Rosa to be found guilty so that her guilty verdict could be appealed to a higher court. Only in the higher courts could they get the segregationist laws changed or removed. Rosa was found guilty of violating the segregation laws, and she was given a suspended sentence, fined $10, plus a $4 court cost. More local preachers met and formed the Montgomery Improvement Association. They felt the NAACP was too weak in Alabama, and they wanted a more localized organization to deal with matters. They met that afternoon and decided to elect Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. as president of the organization. Rosa Parks had never met Dr. King until this time, in August of 1955. Rosa knew Coretta Scott King casually, as she had attended some of her concerts, but she had no idea the woman was married to a reverend. Dr. King was new to Montgomery, which they saw as an advantage. He was also new to the civil rights movement, having been coaxed into participation from Dr. Abernathy and others at his new church. A meeting was called at the Holt Street Baptist Church. This church sits directly in the center of an all-black neighborhood, so they did not need to be afraid to attend. They were not sure how many people would attend, but soon the entire church was overflowing with people. So many people that after the building was filled to the max, there were still hundreds of people standing out in the church lawn. The church staff members scrambled to set up a speaker system outside so that everyone could hear. The main topic at this meeting was whether or not to continue the boycott. Some people at the meeting thought they should quit while they were ahead, but others thought that surely the boycott could not be sustained longer than the end of the week, 4 more days. What everyone knew was that the whites would not stand for this long. Mr. Nixon spoke in the meeting, and he said, "You who are afraid, you better get your hat and coat and go home. This is going to be a long, drawn-out affair. I want to tell you something. For years and years, I've been talking about how I didn't want the children who came along behind me to suffer the indignities that I have suffered all of these years. Well, now I've changed my mind. I want to enjoy some of that freedom myself." Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke as well, and his speech made the crowd really excited. My favorite line from this speech is as follows: "If you will protest courageously and yet with dignity and Christian love, when the history books are written in future generations, the historians will pause and say, 'There lived a great people, a black people, who injected new meaning and dignity into the veins of civilization.' That is our challenge and our overwhelming responsibility." Dr. King received a thunderous applause at this, and then Rosa was introduced to the crowd. She had asked if they wanted her to speak. They had told her, "You have had enough, and you have said enough, and you do not have to speak." So, she did not speak, but she paid attention and enjoyed listening to everyone else speak on that evening. The meeting ended with a reading of the demands they intended to bring to the bus company. 1. Courteous treatment on the buses. 2. First come, first serve seating with whites in front and blacks in back. 3. Hiring black drivers for black bus routes. The crowd cheered and gave their approval of the demands. That following Thursday, on December 8, 1955, Dr. King and attorney Fred Gray met with 3 Montgomery City commissioners alongside representatives from the bus company. The bus company refused to accept any of the demands. They would not even give an inch. They did not want to be seen compromising with the black people. So the boycott continued all through the rest of the week, longer than anyone thought it would last. And then it kept going for another week. The white people started to do anything they could to stop the boycott. Police threatened black people at the bus stops who were waiting for cabs. Then they threatened to arrest the cab driver if they did not charge the full fare. Many people in town lost their jobs because of their support for the boycott. The white owner of the barber shop on the Air Force Base where Parks worked put up a sign that said there was to be no discussion of the bus protest or Rosa Parks in his establishment. So, Parks quit. He could not work in a place where his wife's name could not be spoken. Rosa, through a series of unforeseeable events, also lost her job at the Montgomery Fair tailor shop. When the police began arresting cab drivers for not charging the 45-cent fare instead of the 10-cent fare like the buses, people began volunteering as drivers. The churches collected money and purchased a couple of station wagons. Rosa worked as a dispatcher. She would take calls from people who needed rides, and then she would arrange a private car or a church station wagon to pick them up wherever they were. They developed quite a sophisticated system for this, which ended up including 20 private cars and 14 station wagons. There were 32 pickup and drop-off locations. Rides were available from 5:30 a.m. until 12:30 at night. During this time, it's estimated that 30,000 people used the service to get to and from work every day. The white women of the town, who employed black maids and cooks, soon realized that they could not go without their house staff, so they began driving their maids and cooks to and from work each day. The town mayor implored the women to not assist the boycott in this way. But hey, they weren't going to clean their houses themselves. None of this was as easy as it may sound, though. Police arrested the private drivers for any and every minor traffic violation, and anonymous letters were sent to some white households. A typical version of these letters would say, "Listed below are a few of the white people who are still hauling their Negro maids. This must stop. These people would appreciate a call from you, day or night. Let's let them know how we feel about them hauling Negroes." The mayor announced that he would no longer negotiate with the boycotters. He called the leaders of the boycott a bunch of Negro radicals. The violence escalated quickly. Dr. King's home was bombed at the end of January, and then 2 days after, Mr. Nixon's home was also bombed. Rosa received threatening phone calls at home, which frightened her. That February, Fred Gray filed a suit in the U.S. District Court saying that bus segregation was unconstitutional. The appeal for Rosa's case had been thrown out on a technicality, and her conviction was upheld in court. This new suit was filed on behalf of 5 women who had been mistreated on the bus. Rosa and Claudette were both part of that group of 5. This boycott was costing the bus company a lot of money. The buses still drove up and down the streets, but there were only 1 or 2 white people riding the bus. In the middle of February, a group of sleazy white attorneys dug up an old law which prohibited boycotts. And then, on February 21st, an all-white grand jury handed down 89 indictments against the boycotters. Rosa was re-indicted. Everyone was fingerprinted, and pictures of Rosa Parks being fingerprinted showed up on the cover of the New York Times. Rosa likes to point out that many people see this photo and claim it was from her first arrest, which it was not. Trials for these 89 people began on March 19th. Dr. King was the first to be tried, and the court was packed. You could not even get in. They would not allow people to stand in the back or in the aisles, but there were a lot of witnesses called for the defense. Each one testified about conditions for Black people on the buses. One of Rosa's neighbors was questioned about why she stopped riding the bus, and she explained that she stopped riding the bus after a police officer shot and killed her husband, a war veteran, while he was on the bus. Every person who got up on the stand had a personal reason to stop riding the buses. Dr. King was found guilty, of course, and he was given a $500 fine, or he could serve 1 year hard labor. This ruling was successfully appealed, so Dr. King never had to do either of these things. They stopped after Dr. King's trial. None of the other 89 people who had been arrested were on trial, and the boycott continued. Black people continued walking and carpooling all through the spring. Rosa contributed in any way she could. There was a lot of attention being paid to this boycott, even from out of state. Rosa was asked to speak at many churches, schools, and other organizations. She accepted expense money, but never took a speaker's fee. Any money given to her for her speeches was used to buy new station wagons or to pay for other boycott expenses. Parks was always concerned for Rosa, but she never encountered anything unpleasant during her speaking engagements. That June, a 3-judge federal district court ruled 2-1 in favor of the suit against segregation on city buses. The city commissioner appealed this decision to the U.S. Supreme Court. During the summer, while people were still boycotting, the white people tried a new tactic to break up the boycott. They refused to give insurance to the station wagons owned by the churches. So Dr. King got in contact with a Black insurance agent from Atlanta named T.M. Alexander, and he got Lloyd's of London, the largest insurance company in England, to insure all of the church vehicles. The final tactic Mayor Gale tried was to make it unlawful to gather on street corners while waiting on the cars. The court issued this order, but it happened on the same day that the United States Supreme Court ruled that segregation on the Montgomery buses was unconstitutional. November 13th, 1956. Everyone was overjoyed at this news, but the boycott continued. The ruling from the Supreme Court would not arrive for another month or so. The Black residents stayed off the buses until the ruling arrived, and it was official. The court order arrived on December 20th, and the very next day, the buses were full of riders once again. The boycott, which was supposed to be 5 days, had now lasted more than a year. Dr. King, along with Reverend Abernathy, Mr. Nixon, and Glenn Smiley, made a show out of riding the very first integrated bus through Montgomery. Many history books claim that Rosa Parks was along for this ride, but she was not. That day, Leona, Rosa's mother, was not feeling well, so she had chosen to stay home with her mother. A reporter for Look magazine somehow found out where Rosa lived and came to her house. They waited until she had finished making some food for her mother, and then they drove Rosa downtown and had her get on and off of the buses over and over so they could take photos. This is the reason people believe Rosa was riding in the initial integrated bus, but it was just for show. One of the buses Rosa got onto for this photo op was being driven by none other than James Blake, the driver who had had Rosa arrested. Neither party was too excited about this chance meeting. The white reporter would also sit just behind Rosa in the photos, This was very risque, showing a black woman sitting in front of a white man on a bus. The integrated buses were not all hunky-dory following the Supreme Court decision. Snipers would fire at the buses, and the city made curfews for the buses so that they could not run after 5 p.m., which meant most black people who worked day jobs letting out at 5 still could not ride the bus home. Some white men attempted to form their own whites-only bus line, but that failed. And then things began to settle down for a bit in Montgomery. In other cities throughout the South, such as Birmingham, Tallahassee, and others, bus boycotts began springing up, and the civil rights movement of direct action was born. Not long after the boycott ended, the harassment of those who had been involved escalated. Rosa and her family decided it was time to take their leave of the segregated South and move north to Detroit. Sylvester, Rosa's brother, had rented an apartment for Rosa Parks and Leona on Euclid Avenue. Rosa still traveled a lot, engaged in speaking tours and supporting efforts for the civil rights movement. Rosa traveled to speak in Birmingham following the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church. We covered this horrific crime on Season 1 of The Secret Sits. While Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was on stage speaking, a white man from the audience leapt onto the stage and punched Dr. King in the face. The force from the blow was enough to spin the stunned doctor halfway around. The man began pounding on Dr. King, hitting him with multiple blows. The whole time Dr. King had his arms in front of his face in an attempt to shield himself from the onslaught of blows. And then suddenly, Dr. King just threw his hands down to his sides and faced the man unprotected. This shocked the man so much that he stopped hitting Dr. King just long enough to be tackled by others in the room. Dr. King shouted to the men, "Don't touch him. We have to pray for him." The man was a member of the American Nazi Party, an extremely racist organization from this time in the South. Dr. King refused to press charges against the man. Nonviolence was Dr. King's belief, and that belief extended even to his aggressors. Rosa Parks participated in the March on Washington in 1963. This march was used to push for federal civil rights laws. In 1964, President Lyndon Baines Johnson passed the 1964 Civil Rights Act. This was the furthest-reaching legislation since the end of the Civil War. The bill was supposed to guarantee black people the right to vote, to use public accommodations, and it also allowed the federal government to punish those who broke these laws. Of course, this Civil Rights Act did not and could not solve all of the problems black people were having in the United States. The civil rights movement continued even after its passage. In 1965, black residents of Selma, Alabama, were still having a hard time registering to vote, so they began staging protests. That February, Selma's sheriff, Jim Clark, and his deputies surrounded a group of approximately 150 black youths who were participating in a demonstration, and they began herding these people out of town. They made them walk down the road, and they used cattle prods to keep all of the youths moving at the same pace. A local TV news station filmed this happening, and it was soon seen across the nation. This scene enraged civil rights activists and many white people who stood against racism. Dr. King called for a mass march from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. The group was granted a march permit, but they could only have 300 people at a time on the two-lane road which bridged the two cities. When the road widened out to 4 lanes, there was no limit to the number of marchers who could be present. Rosa Parks was invited to join the march in its last leg, the section where they would enter downtown Montgomery. Participating in the march felt strange to Rosa. She had not lived in Alabama for some time now, and everyone who had been young was now grown. Many people in the town did not even recognize Rosa anymore. Participants in this last section of the march were supposed to be wearing a specific color coat, which Rosa was not. So the marchers kept kicking her out of the march. Rosa, being meek and polite, would then just stand on the side of the street, watching the marchers pass her by, until someone who recognized her walked by and would pull her back into the march. As the march entered downtown, people finally began making sure that Rosa Parks made her way to the front of the march. At the front of the march, Rosa was photographed with the head of the NAACP, Roy Wilkins, and the first black winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, Ralph Bunche. But Rosa's most prevalent memory of this march was being placed on the sidelines and people just passing her by. Rosa also remembers that on this day, Miss Viola Liuzzo was murdered. Viola was a white woman from Detroit who was very passionate about helping the civil rights movement. She was driving with a young black volunteer in her car through Luandese County, transporting marchers from Montgomery back to Selma, when a car full of KKK members pulled up next to her car and shot her dead. In August of 1965, LBJ signed the Voting Rights Act into law. This allowed black people who were denied to register to vote locally to register with the federal examiners. John Conyers was a black attorney who worked as a legislative assistant. He ran for Congress and asked Rosa Parks for her endorsement. After he won his election, he asked Rosa to work for him in his Detroit office. She began work there on March 1st, 1965, and that is where she remained until she retired on September 30th, 1988. Rosa was a receptionist and office assistant. She also found housing for the unhoused and other charitable type of work. 3 years after Rosa began this new job, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated while in Memphis, Tennessee, to participate in a march to support black garbage collectors. It was April 4th, 1968, close to Easter. Rosa was devastated. In response to this act of hatred toward the black community, Rosa traveled to Memphis and participated in the march Dr. King had organized for the black trash collectors. After the march, Harry Belafonte flew Rosa Parks to Atlanta on a private plane so she could attend Dr. King's memorial service. Senator Robert Kennedy and his wife Ethel were in attendance at the service, and Rosa met them for the first time there. 2 months later, Robert Kennedy would be assassinated. The 1970s arrived and brought great sorrow to Rosa Parks. Rosa's husband, Parks, her mother, Leona, and her brother, Sylvester, were all sick at the same time, and Rosa had to spend her time traveling between 3 different hospitals in order to see all 3 of them and spend time with them. Because of this, she began only working part-time hours. In 1977, Parks passed away after a long 5-year struggle with cancer. He was 74 years old. 3 months later, Sylvester also passed away. Cancer took him from Rosa as well. Rosa had to place her mother in an assisted living facility. She was sick from cancer, and Rosa could not keep up with everything by herself. In 1978, Rosa moved into an apartment building for senior citizens. She took Leona out of the nursing home and brought her home. She cared for her mother for the next year until cancer, once again, took someone Rosa loved. Leona was 91 years old. Rosa was not in the best of health by this point either, but after her mother passed, Rosa began working again. She could not do everything she wanted, but she did what she could. In 1987, Rosa realized her lifelong dream of opening an organization dedicated to helping young people, the Rosa and Raymond Parks Institute for Self-Development. This group helps get youths scholarships. They offer courses on communication skills, economic skills, political awareness, and health awareness. They work to instill a sense of hope, dignity, and pride, the things instilled in Rosa Parks by her family. As Rosa Parks looked back at her life, she fondly remembers two special times she was honored. The bus on which Rosa was arrested way back in December of 1955 was part of the Cleveland Avenue line. Today, Cleveland Avenue is named Rosa Parks Boulevard. In November of 1989, a memorial was dedicated in Montgomery. The sculpture was designed by Maya Lin, the architect who created the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, D.C. The names of 40 men and women who were killed in the Civil Rights Movement are carved into the circular black granite table. Behind this table is a curving wall where water cascades down. The water creates a thin, translucent veil over the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Until justice rolls down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. Rosa was very proud to have been invited to the dedication of this memorial. Rosa Parks is sometimes referred to as the mother of the Civil Rights Movement, or the patron saint of the Civil Rights Movement, but she did not feel that way. She had more honorary degrees, awards, and plaques than she could count, but she cherished each and every one of them. When she was interviewed, reporters wanted to shrink the importance of her life down to one singular moment, which took place on a bus in 1955. Rosa understood that she, as a person, and her life was a symbol, but Rosa did not particularly care for being a public person. On August 30th, 1994, after turning 81 years old, Rosa Parks was mugged in her own home by a black man named Joseph Skipper. This man broke down Rosa's back door, and when Rosa ran to the door to see what was happening, the man told her he had ran off an intruder. He then asked Rosa for a tip for his good deed. Rosa walked upstairs to get her purse, and the man followed her up the stairs. Rosa produced $3 for the man. He asked for more. Rosa told him no. He then began to beat her. He shook the 81-year-old icon and punched her repeatedly in the face until Rosa finally gave him all the money she had, $103. After the man left, Rosa called her neighbor across the street, and they contacted the police. It took the police 50 minutes to respond to this vicious beating. Word got out on the street that Joseph Skipper had attacked Rosa Parks, and the street thugs from the west side hunted down Skipper and beat the hell out of the man. Rosa began suffering from anxiety when she returned to her small central Detroit house following this ordeal. Because of this, Rosa moved into Riverfront Towers, a secure high-rise apartment building. After learning of Rosa Parks' move, Little Caesars owner Mike Ilitch offered to pay for her housing expenses for as long as necessary. On June 15, 1999, Rosa received the Congressional Gold Medal, our nation's highest recognition. President Bill Clinton presented Rosa with the medal and said that Rosa Parks' story was the quintessential story of the 20th century, the triumph of freedom. In 2002, Rosa Parks received an eviction notice from her apartment. By this time, she was so frail, she was not able to manage her own financial affairs. Her rent ended up being paid by a collection taken by the Hartford Memorial Baptist Church in Detroit. When she once again received an eviction notice in 2004, it became a public outrage, and the owners of the building announced that they would allow Rosa to remain in the building, rent-free, for the remainder of her life. Rosa Parks' life came to an end on October 24th, 2005, at the age of 92. She died of natural causes, comfortable inside of her own apartment on the east side of Detroit. Officials in Montgomery announced that all city buses would leave their front seats empty and reserved with black ribbons in honor of Rosa Parks. Rosa's coffin was flown to Montgomery and taken on a horse-drawn hearse to the St. Paul African Methodist Episcopal Church. Here she laid in repose on October 29th, 2005. That evening, her casket was taken to Washington, D.C., and transported to the United States Capitol building to lie in honor in the rotunda of the Capitol. Since the founding of this practice in 1852, Rosa Parks was only the 31st person to be given this honor. She was the very first woman, and only the second Black person to ever lie in honor in the Capitol. An estimated 50,000 people came to view Rosa's casket in the rotunda, and the event was broadcast on television on October 31st, 2005. On November 2nd, Rosa was moved to Detroit, and her funeral service was held at the Greater Grace Temple Church. After the service, an honor guard from the Michigan National Guard laid the United States of American flag over her casket and carried it to a horse-drawn hearse, which then proceeded to the cemetery. As the hearse passed the thousands of onlookers, they began to cheer and clap, and many released white balloons. Rosa was laid to rest in the Woodlawn Cemetery Chapel, gently snuggled between her lifelong husband Parks and her mother, Leona, just as she had always been in life. This chapel was renamed the Rosa L. Parks Freedom Chapel in her honor. I would like to end this episode with a quote written to Rosa Parks from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. To Rosa Parks, whose creative witness was the great force that led to the modern stride toward freedom.
The Secret Sits podcast is researched and written by me, John Dodson. Audio engineering by Gabriel Dodson. Original logo artwork provided by Tony Lay.